are going to drive next week than fly. They always do, the more people drive, naturally. But some people are going to cancel flights to drive that 300 miles to Grandma.
I got to tell you, Larry, the last thing we want is to get people out of airplanes into cars. There's no question about it. But we represent 110,000 members, and they're only interested in my advising them on aviation issues. I can't advise them on airplanes or trains or trucks.
All right, so what are you saying to the airline traveler next week who's going to be flying commuter?
All right, here's the thing.
Or tomorrow.
Larry, if you're booked on an aircraft which is 30 and fewer seats, try to move up to a larger airplane, over 30 seats, a jet. If you have to, maybe instead of taking a nonstop flight, take a connecting flight, that's probably preferable. If you have to maybe drive to a closer city, like folks here in Washington could maybe drive to BWI, or in Newark, they go to Newark, or up in Chicago, maybe to Midway. I mean, you can make those minor adjustments. The other thing is, if you absolutely have to fly on one of these 30 and fewer seat airplanes, don't do it at night, don't do it in bad weather, and especially don't do it in both. And you got to check both your place you're departing from and the place you're arriving at.
How about the weather in between?
Well, usually that's not as much of a problem. 90% of the accidents in aviation occur during the takeoff and departure phase and approach and landing. The cruise phase is a pretty benign environment, so just be careful at both ends. And let's say you find out the weather's bad. Well, maybe you should just delay the flight. No. Don't go. It's easy.
One more call. Halifax, Nova Scotia. Hello.
Hi. My son was killed in Los Angeles in February 1991. The recommendations for preventing cause of death, namely toxic linings, have not been implemented. What is Mr. Stempler doing about advising his members to stay off of planes whose linings have not been updated to meet current requirements?
I believe he's talking about the materials on board the airplanes, the carpeting and whatever. They're making a lot of progress along in those areas, and we've certainly brought that to the attention of the FAA. Burn-proof and things along those lines.
Thank you, David.
Injured on the ground, 3 are in critical condition. Live in the newsroom, I'm Ken McLeod for Eyewitness News Primetime.
All right, thanks, Ken. Now an update on last night's American Eagle plane crash near Raleigh-Durham. We learned just minutes ago that the pilots of Flight 3379 discussed an engine flameout and a missed approach just moments before the plane crashed. A just-released preliminary review of the flight voice recorder suggests that the crew may have known it was in trouble. The plane crashed last night 4 miles short of the runway at Raleigh-Durham Airport. Investigators spent this day in the dense woods of Morrisville looking for clues in the wreckage. Channel 5's Sharon Crowley has been in Raleigh since last in this report.
A plane report on the same route taken by the ill-fated American Eagle Flight 3379. There, 13 passengers and 2 crew members were killed. Investigators say they still don't know why the commuter jet went down, but they're looking at the possibility that weather conditions or pilot error played a role.
This passenger stated that he was seated in the back of the airplane. He said that with no warning, the bottom dropped out, or dropped hard. He said that after the drop, he felt like the pilots were attempting to regain control of the airplane.
The National Transportation and Safety Board says their investigation could take up to a year to complete. They've been going through the wreckage all day today, and they say it's been very difficult as the crash is in a very wooded area and the terrain very muddy.
The cockpit was located in an area that is described as approximately 25 by 25 feet, which contains the burn area. There was extensive fire damage to the cockpit.
There were 5 survivors of that crash. Many are still listed in critical condition.
My first impression of this is that this is our little miracle. And I have a husband for Christmas. And I have a father who's going to be there for my kids.
Investigators say they will likely be out at the scene of the crash for several weeks trying to put the pieces together. In Morrisville, North Carolina, this is Sharon Crowley for Eyewitness News Primetime.
Among the 15 dead in that crash was a Georgia man, Dennis Allain of Kennesaw. Tonight, his family is struggling desperately to deal with their grief. An American Eagle representative notified the family today. Allain boarded the doomed flight last night, headed for a job in Michigan. His wife was waiting for a phone call of a safe arrival when she got a call instead from a doctor.
About sometime around 12 o'clock or maybe
To try to improve safety among the nation's commuter airlines, Transportation Secretary Federico Pena was at the crash site today. He says his department is adding 300 additional inspectors to begin an immediate safety audit of every air carrier in the U.S. He promises to raise commuter air standards to those of bigger carriers within the next 100 days. Pena added he plans to call a meeting of federal safety officials and pilots from all air carriers. Air travel's been deregulated since the early 80s. The competition has become so fierce that now almost everyone can afford to fly, which raises the question, has safety been compromised? What do you think? That's our Feedback 5 question tonight. How do you feel about the safety of the airline industry? Now, you can use your computer to email your answer to us. Our internet address on the information superhighway is wagatv@america.net. Again, that's wagatv@america.net.
Thunderstorms accompanied the snow. Winds gusted up to 75 miles per hour. Chicago's barometer fell.
Investigators continued their search for answers as a pool of reporters and photographers was allowed into the scene to survey the destruction firsthand.
Where the plane came down, there's just debris strewn in all the directions. Small pieces, some large pieces. You see like a wing propped up against a tree, and there's just small pieces of metal, and the hydraulic systems just laying in the ground, and a couple of the seats were kind of up in some trees. And
also taken into the scene today were family members of one of the victims, trying to come up with answers of their own. Those at the site say it was nothing short of a Christmas miracle that anybody survived.
It's hard to see how anybody could have come out of that.
Earlier, authorities released the 911 call made Tuesday, seconds after the plane went down.
Can you tell what kind of plane?
I just heard it, ma'am. It's a twin engine, maybe. It's a single engine. It's a turboprop or a turbocharged.
Are you going to be standing by there?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that a business or a house?
I'm at home, ma'am. Call the Samar.
I am, sir, but you need to answer my question.
Right,
what's your last name?
The NTSB will ship the plane's major parts to nearby hangars to try and reconstruct what happened. At the moment, the best lead is a possible flameout in one of the engines. Now, that investigation will be exhaustive, no shortcuts. It could take up to a year unless something very obvious stands out very early on. To that end, they will be taking a very close look at those engines right away. Mike?
Realizing all of this is very preliminary, Keith, let's say that the one engine is in fact at fault. What about the other engine? Wouldn't that have saved the aircraft?
You know, it should have saved the aircraft, but under the wrong circumstances, that second engine could have sent the plane into some kind of a spin.
In chaos. The paramedics were just arriving. The fire trucks were just arriving. People were trying to get away from the building. The one apartment complex was totally ablaze.
The plane had just completed a National Guard war game when it reported engine problems.